Okay, the next module that we're going to do is review the order, shipment, and picks data structures. So here we're going to look at the order model, the shipment model, and how they relate, gain an understanding of how to construct SQL statements to get at the order and shipment information, understand how picks are related to shipments, and get into some common mistakes that people make while looking at these structures. Now, obviously, we have a fairly complicated set of structures, but basically what it boils down to is orders contain order lines. Order lines are related to shipment lines. Shipment lines go up to shipments. Shipments are attached to stops. We kind of go up from there. So we're going to concentrate on kind of that level of information during this module. Okay, the order table. Start off with the order table, the ORD table. We have ship to information, route to information, bill to information. The thing that's important there, the route to is the thing that we really care about in terms of that's the next point. That's our shipment. That's where our shipment is going. The ultimate ship to could be some other place. So, for instance, we might be shipping to our ship point, which is a distribution center. The ultimate ship point might be the store if we're doing a distribution system that way. Now, we actually might have situations where we've got labeling requirements, and what's important about this model is that it supports what's called Mark IV ship to labels, which allow us to basically say we're going to mark them for both things. We're going to put the information about what DC it goes on to, but we're also going to put in the shipment information about where it's going to go after it gets to its next point, so that when it gets to the DC, then they can look at the label and say, oh, it's got to go to this store. And then likewise, a lot of times what we'll do in those kinds of labels is we'll actually mark them for the department that they go to, because typically if we're doing like a Mark IV ship to kind of thing, we've got very precise idea of what department the product's going to, and the label requirements are very precise, and we don't want our customers to get chargebacks because we leave out a piece of information. So we can go all the way down to the department within a store if we get that information, or have it on the customer requirements record. We have other order level attributes. Order line is linked to the order. Part number and quantity are there. Other inventory attributes. And all the order lines can have their own shipment windows. So typically you get an order down and all the order lines are going to have their own shipment windows. But take a step back in terms of how this system grew up. This system grew up underneath a order management, an order distribution system where we could actually, what Compaq would do is, Compaq would actually send us orders with order lines, and if, depending on what was going on in their network, they would potentially pluck an order line out from underneath us if we hadn't allocated it yet, send it to some other distribution center, and fulfill it there. So we were constantly getting order lines plucked and moved to us and shipped around, and they would all have their, so we moved the shipment windows down to the order lines because we actually could have different windows depending on the commitments that we've made to customers. But typically, more typically, you would find all of the order lines have the same shipment windows. Okay, shipment line basically is a shippable order line. You can think of it that way. It links to an instance of an order line and links back to the shipment. It links the shipment back to both inventory and the shipment that it's going on. The shipment has the shipment level information, has the route to information, which again is the thing that we care about. Once we turn this into a shipment, the thing we care about is the route to. And at the shipment level, we keep the carrier service levels, that sort of thing. Saturday delivery is one of the other things we keep at that level. So let's talk about the order in detail, and I'm really going to spend time talking about the order line because that's really where most of the work is done. So we get to the order line by ord num, ord line, ord subline, client ID, and warehouse ID. Important attributes. part number, origin code, rev level, lot number, inventory status, and then packaging attributes, units per case, units per pallet, units per pack. We do have customers, again, if we're in a compliance situation where some customers want only standard configuration, so they want either a standard case or they want a standard pallet configuration, and having those additional attributes on there allows us to say very specifically, oh, we're only going to send them, if it's units per case of 6, Kohl's likes things in units per case of 6. They're only going to get things in units per case of 6. Married code. Married code's one of those things that is not often used and more misunderstood. A married code allows you to define like things that ship together or ship in like quantities. So again, if you look back at our origin for this, we grew up in the computer world. At one time we were shipping, all of Compaq, virtually all of Compaq and most of Dell. So we had a huge amount of computers that we were shipping out of our system. And again, we have something like that for cell phones. So, we still do a lot of electronic stuff. In electronics, the thing that you want to do is you don't want to have a situation where you say, hey, great, I'm going to send you all those computers. I sent you the 6 computers, but I only sent you 4 monitors. And the guy's going to say, well, what the heck use are the 6 computers if I only have 4 monitors? Or worse, if we send him 6 monitors and only 4 CPUs, right? So married code allows you to say, these items are married, so that if we're sending 4 of these, we're only going to send 4 of these, so that at least they have usable things when they get them, right? Now, there's a couple different ways to do married codes, actually. There's explicit married codes by using the married code field. There's also implicit married codes. Married codes are implicitly created by using sublines. If you have an order line and so if we kind of shift things down one notch and say you got order line 001 and you put everything on your order sublines, so order line subline is 001, 002, 003, 004, those things implicitly become married and will ship in like quantities. So that's one of those things that most people don't really even know what married code means. And then the other thing is that whole subline thing, everyone goes, well, what's with the subline? Well, sublines allow us to have one more level of detail, so we can actually take a line that has distinct parts underneath it, and then we can decide how we're going to act on that one line, and then we can do things like marry them together to say, look, if we can only satisfy 6 of the 10, because that's kind of the least common denominator of quantities, we'll satisfy the 6. So that's kind of a little bit of a misunderstood thing on there. Required dates, early and late ship date, early and late delivery date. We often take the delivery date and back off the expected in-transit time to create the ship dates. So we can actually have a transportation system do that, or sometimes what we'll do is, based on the region, we'll automatically just say, okay, if the delivery date's, the 1st, and it's on the East Coast, then we have to ship it by the 30th, but if it's on the West Coast, we have to ship it by the 28th, and then we'll back off the dates. So a lot of that is actually done by the integration, but sometimes you have to get involved in that depending on the project and how they deal with their delivery windows. One important thing on that, if you have your delivery windows upside down, okay, the system tends not to work. Okay, I get this call every once in a while that I couldn't allocate. Well, actually, I couldn't create the shipment. And it kept on breaking the shipment into smaller and smaller pieces because it was trying to marry things together to create a shipment. And one of the things you were telling it to do is say, use the same windows, right? And so we can do this. Really, we can say, we'll get the union, we'll get the stuff in here. Okay, if you say I want to start here and end here, we'll get all the stuff in this range. But if you actually have your end date prior to your start date, none of that works. So one of the things that we commonly do is just make sure, if you're not getting allocation, or if you aren't creating shipments correctly, just check to make sure that somebody isn't messing around with the dates, because that is actually I've heard 2 or 3 times in the last 3 months that people have had trouble, and frankly, they didn't even realize that they were doing that. They were using their shipment windows, and it was purely by accident that this happened. And we'll talk about the way the create shipment stuff works, and it's all by triggers essentially, and those triggers are on by default. And if you don't want to do those consolidations, including those delivery windows, you have to actually go in there and disable the triggers. Customer requirements. Now this is often copied from the customer and part requirements table, or it can actually get downloaded depending on how the setup is. Those are partials, the things that we typically see there. Partials, will the customer accept partials, or do you have to ship 100% or nothing? Will they accept partial, so that's partial lines. Will they accept partial cases? Can they accept split cases essentially? This actually is a function of a lot of times how their ASNs work. Some customers, on the ASN, there's a bunch of different segments, and when it comes to inventory, there's two main segments. One is the full case segment, and one is the split case segment. So some customers can only process full case segments. They have no idea how to process that other segment that gives them split case quantities. So if that's the case, then they'll say, oh, nope, sorry, can't do it. Can't take a split case because I don't know how to deal with it. And I can't even send them the ASN that says they got a split case. On the other hand, some customers, because they only want to handle one inventory segment, they'll have you send everything as a split case, even full cases. So they'll actually have everything sent in the split case segment. So it just depends on what's going on. But that is a Linens and Things is a good example, and I believe it's Linens and Things does that, where they only wanted to take one segment and said they don't want to deal with both the standard case and the split case segment. So they basically said, just send everything in the split case segment, and we know when it's a standard pack or not. Standard case, some customers will only accept the standard cases that we've negotiated, the customers have negotiated, so they only want the cases of 6. If you got cases of 10, they don't want them because they're used to cases of 6. And the back order. Can we ship? The back order really means, what the back order really means is, I mean, to us it means we're going to take the back order and we're not going to just flush the quantities and then be done with it after we ship the thing. We're going to keep it, but what it really means is the customer is able to receive against a PO more than once. So the back order flag really not only has to do with the fact that who's keeping the back order, but it has to do with who's dealing with the customer's PO. So can the customer, so it actually could be a couple things. We could actually have a situation where, we are actually maintaining the back order. We rarely actually do this. We actually are maintaining the back ordered quantities for somebody, but ultimately if the back order flag is set, that means that the customer can accept shipments, multiple shipments against a single PO, which is not often the case. So quantities, host quantity, order quantity, reservation quantity, and pick quantity, ship quantity. So these are the quantities on the order line. Now reservation manager is something that's fairly infrequently used. This is what the reservation manager is designed to do. If you think about allocates location, inventory to locations, very precisely to a location. Reservation allows you to say, at a macro level, I'm going to reserve, 50 of these SKU, 50 of this part against these sets of orders, and then 50. But it doesn't say it's down to this detail. It just, doesn't mean I'm going to reserve these in the forward pick phase. It just means in the four walls someplace, I'm going to say I'm reserving 50 for this customer, 50 for this customer, and then all the rest of those things can go. So it's a higher level of, it's true reservation. It's reserving the stuff but not allocating it. It's not really frequently used. And there's quite a bit of overhead. That it was rewritten in 2004, 2005 to be much more effective. The problem that you have is that you have to figure out when to shuffle the deck. You have to reshuffle the deck periodically on this, because do you reshuffle the deck every time somebody cancels something and say, oh, I'm canceling this, and then you reshuffle the deck and reallocate the inventory to some other sets of orders? It just adds a lot of extra overhead. We did this back in the day when the ERP systems, really couldn't. They weren't really equipped to do that. Now the ERP systems tend to do this for us and tend to like to actually send us shippable orders, right? If they're sending it to us, they can ship. They might put a priority. What we actually used to do is, imagine this: we'd get an order down, and based on the reservation priority and stuff like that, we'd reserve it, but we may not ship it for a while. Now, meanwhile, we've sucked up all the stock, holding it for this one guy who they're holding it for, but he hasn't passed his credit check yet. So now we're not shipping against anybody else because we reserved it against this guy. And so there's a lot of kind of other issues that go along with us doing the reservations. Absolutely can do it, and we still do it from time to time. But just so you know, that reservation quantity, a lot of you guys, if you haven't dealt with a reservation system, you just automatically think, oh, it's the same thing as it essentially becomes the same thing as the order quantity, right? And it does if you're not using reservations. But you could have a situation where you've got ordered quantity of 100, but we can only reserve 50 for you, Mr. Customer, because you're not as important to us as this other customer. So that's kind of where that came in. It also allows you to do something that we have used in manufacturing systems. We've used reservations to implement safety stock. So you could actually use reservations and only have two different kinds of priorities: orders and safety stock. Well, you'd have three. You'd have orders, safety stock, and emergency orders, right? And the priority would be safety stock is, let's say, a 10. Well, let's make it easy. Safety stock is a 2, normal orders are 3, and emergency orders are a 1. And so just normal orders would be fine until you hit safety stock, and then we wouldn't be able to process those because we were holding safety stock just in case an emergency order came. So the other thing that reservations allow you to do, if you would decide to do it, is to implement something like safety stock. Again, not often done, but you can implement safety stock actually without having the reservation manager running. On the order lines, we have carrier, service level, and Saturday delivery can be assigned here. Over allocation, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I've done a lot of this because I did a lot of the manufacturing site systems. We would do over allocation stuff for when we get orders from the WIP lines to deliver into the work order areas and to the flow lines, where you don't want to be piece picking anything for those guys. If they order 20 and your units per case, is 6, you're going to send them 24 because you're going to round up to the next case quantity, right? You're never going to want to piece pick to a line. Let them deal with the quantity down there and then back flush it back to you if they want to. So this over allocation stuff on an order, and I'm not talking about replenishment right now because a replenishment's handy, right? Because you want to be able to over allocate a replenishment because you don't want to send necessarily just the pieces you want. You want to be able to send full cases down there. But on an order, it's not typically used. It's not like, hey, if I order 5, they're going to send me 6 for the same price because they rounded up to the next thing. It would be nice, but it typically is not the case unless it stays in the organization. So the shipment gets the route to cust. Now what happens then is the shipment we move from the order lines, potentially we move the shipment information, the carrier code, service level, and delivery flag, Saturday delivery flag up from the order line onto the shipment. And then we get the destination area, destination location on the shipment as well. Now this again goes back to one of those situations where we put this in the product because at the time, were doing a lot of manufacturing systems. And the manufacturing systems, they wanted to be able to say, it needs to go to this line, this workstation. So they'd order the product, and we say, okay, where is it going? It's staying in the facility. It's going to this line, this. So we'd have a destination area, destination location in there, and they'd be able to route it right up to the work cell. In fact, we did all kinds of really cool conveyor-based stuff where we're delivering stuff right into the work cells at Compact and other places. And so that's where this came from. But one of the nice things about this destination area, destination location thing is it allows you to specify where. So you can actually, when you get around to allocating, you could say, well, if I'm going here, allocate from here. So this is a handy little thing that we've done mods for in the past where we've said, well, we don't really have destination areas to worry about, but we do want to be able to say where we allocate it specifically sometimes. And so we do a little trick where we actually make an area on the other, logically on the other side of the ship dock. So we're going to route through ship dock to get to this area, and we say, okay, we're going to do this destination area just to say, just to have allocate from a source area, and it allows us to trick the system into allocating from a source area where normally that's kind of a complicated mod. And then we just trim off that last hop at register shipment allocation time. So we actually never do that hop into that destination area. But it's a handy little thing to know it's there. There's some behaviors that go along with destination area that are handy if you're doing mods where you want to, like for instance, we used to have to, if it was going to certain areas, the reason that this came up, if it was going to certain areas, a lot of manufacturers that we did systems for, Compaq was one, and Philips Electronic was the other, they had these big vertical carousels in the midst of their work areas. And if it was going to one of those work areas, we'd actually like to see if we could allocate from that vertical carousel before we went back to the, back to the back warehouse. So that's where this ability came from, to say, if I'm going here, there's a different path to look for, the product. So it's a very handy thing if you ever run into that thing where you say, oh, but wait, I always want to allocate it from here. And we just ran into a customer, a couple weeks ago that had that same. We're actually going to try this out and see if it still works. So again here, and then the shipment and delivery dates go on there, and it also has status and state change dates on it. So when it changes from pending to released or staged, it puts the dates on there. The shipment line gets a copy of the order structure, so it gets client ID, order num, order line, or subline, and warehouse ID. It gets a processing priority. It gets a schedule batch, which links you back to the pick batch that it's on, and then it starts to get these quantities. The pick quantity, which is the quantity that we've planned for this guy. In process quantity, the stuff that's in process or allocated, staged, and shipped. So here's the flow of this, and frankly, sometimes I get this wrong because I think I got this. Every time I think I got this, I turn around and I don't quite have this right. But I think so. Order line through the shipment line flow. Order line is received. The order quantity is set to 100. Reservation pick quantity is set, and ship quantity is 0. Right? Okay. So now if reservation runs, then we fill in the reservation quantity. Otherwise, what happens is we just set the reservation quantity equal to the order quantity, and we're off and running. So as soon as it's planned into a shipment, now this is one of those. I think it's an oddity of the way Discrete creates shipments. I mean, it's not the most obvious thing in the world the way we do it now. It just does what it does. It's very effective. But let's follow the flow. Create shipment actually. What it's trying to do there is it creates shipment lines, and then it goes back and says consolidate them up and create shipments out of those shipment lines. So it goes and says create shipment lines, and then try and consolidate them into logical shipments. And it does that by calling this consolidate shipment lines main line, which is essentially just a stub with about 10 triggers on it. And those 10 triggers are a bunch of different consolidate options. One of the mistakes that I find with people when I go into a system is they've never even looked at these guys. I always like to go in there and disable the ones that don't apply to us because they're just trouble. They're just trouble down the line somewhere when something doesn't work, and then they call support in the middle of the night or on a Saturday saying, I can't apply my shipments. So be aware of the things that you need for consolidate. Use those things. Turn off all the rest of those triggers. They're just going to make for trouble at some point, in my opinion. So basically what happens is it does the consolidate main lines, and so let's say you're consolidating by date range, and it'll try and consolidate, those shipment lines into shipments by the rules for the cons by rules and that sort of stuff, but maintaining those other things. I want them to be in this window, and I don't want the weight to exceed this. So you can consolidate by weight. You can do that, consolidate by volume. Those various things that you can do that are essentially consolidating and breaking these shipments and then trying to come up with